All right, it looks like we're ready to go. Welcome back, everyone. So glad you could join us for our February webinar, Show Me the Money. I was thinking about playing the video clip with Tom Cruise, but I decided against it. I think you all know what I'm talking about. My name's Sonja Hodis. I'm one of the many directors at CCI Huronia. I'm a condo lawyer as well as your moderator today. And today's webinar is going to be covering a vast variety of topics dealing with condos and that M word that we all love, money, a word that makes everyone in condo land sit up and pay attention when we mention it. Condos collect it, they borrow it, they invest it, they pay it out. Owners use it to invest in their condos. It's part of their life savings. Property managers are constantly managing money on behalf of condo corporations. There's probably not one topic in condo land that you can discuss that doesn't end up in a discussion about money. And if you think you have a topic that's not going to bring up that money word, put it in the chat box and let's see if we can actually come up with a list of condo topics that don't relate to money. We're definitely in a different economic climate now than we were when COVID started 2 years ago. And there's been a lot of other events and factors which are contributing to the current situation that we're facing. And while no one here is going to have the magic answer as to why we are in the situation that we're in today, we definitely are going to have experiences to share about why about the type of situations we're actually dealing with and the fact that it's a different reality and that we need to start thinking about how we look at decisions in condos that involve money in perhaps a different way. And so from supply chain issues to contract cancellation, snow removal and lawn maintenance contracts to inflation and selling and buying condos and a bunch more in between all of that, we're going to have you covered today. So whether you're an owner, a director, a property manager, or someone that is connected to condos in some way, you're going to want to sit up, pay attention to what our amazing line of speakers have to say. I'm positive that you're probably going to walk away with some nuggets of valuable information, or at the very least, something that you may want to give some further thought to. And speaking of money, before we get started, I want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors. We are very lucky at CCI Huronia to have the support of a variety of different sponsors, and you'll see them up on the screen right now. As I've said before in many of our webinars, and definitely want to thank all of our sponsors again today for their support. Without our sponsors, we're not able to put these webinars out to the public free of charge. So thanks to Atrons Counsel Insurance Brokers, Elia Associates Condominium Lawyers, Purcell Professional Property Management, CWB Maxim Financial, and Common Ground Condo Law. Show our sponsors some love, reach out to them. If you have any questions in the areas that they work in or in the products that they provide, you can always get a direct link to their website. If you just go on our website on the event page, click on today's event, and you can just click on the sponsor logo and it'll take you directly to their website. So thank you again to all of our sponsors, and thank you all for coming and joining us today and being with us this afternoon. So who is the Canadian Condominium Institute? In case you don't know who we are an independent nonprofit organization formed in 1982. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, and we have a new logo for our 40th anniversary. So help us celebrate this year, CCI's 40th birthday. We've got chapters all across the country. In Ontario alone, we have 8, and CCI Huronia is one of those Ontario chapters. Our main objective is education, but we also advocate for condos, and we represent all those involved in condos, from owners to directors to professionals, and we encourage all of these stakeholders to work together. If you haven't had the experience of the benefits of membership of CCI and you're not a member currently, check out one of your local chapters or consider joining today. We would love it if you would love to join the CCI Huronia chapter. And if you do, you can see in the chat box, Debbie will be putting some information about how to join the CCI Huronia chapter, which can all be done online. In addition, CCI National has a resource center, which has a great deal of material available for you to review, and you can go to cci.ca under the Resource Center tab to access that, or you can access that directly from our website, ccihuronia.com. Don't forget to follow and like us on Facebook to find out about what upcoming events we have, and also check out our website frequently, ccihuronia.com, to find out what is happening in our chapter, and also to get access to our Condo Buzz newsletter. The most recent newsletter was just released and is now on our website. We also put on our website previous recordings of our webinars. So if you've missed a recording, please go to our website and check it out. You can get access to it under the resource content tab, and make sure that when you are watching those videos that you subscribe to our channel, hit the thumbs up to show us that you like us, and feel free to share those videos. Just to let everyone know that the meeting today is being recorded. So we just ask everyone to mute their phones. And if you don't want to have yourself on camera, please shut your camera off. And the webinar will be posted on our website within the next 7 to 10 days. So if you want to review it again, or you want to share it with someone else, you can always refer them to our website. We will be dealing with questions in the chat box throughout the webinar, so feel free to put them into the chat box. The speakers will be monitoring the chat box and try to answer those questions. If we have time at the end of the webinar, we will try and take some live questions as well. So, one more thing before we get started, just a reminder to everyone that the information being provided today is general information. It may not apply to your specific fact situation. If you are a condo director and you want to use the protection of Section 37 of the Condominium Act, you do need to get an opinion from your own professionals about your specific fact situation. This webinar is not intended to provide you with opinions that protect you under Section 37 of the Act. In addition, all the information in this webinar is current as of February 25th, 2022. And things may change. So if you're watching this at a later date, just make sure you check with your professionals to make sure that the information is still correct. And finally, any references to the Condominium Act or other legislation today are references to Ontario legislation. So to kick us off, we're going to get started with Evan Shkolnik, who is going to talk to us about what's the situation with supply chain issues? We had some supply chain issues when COVID started, but I think the products that are in short supply now are different than they were when COVID started. So Evan, can you give us an update on sort of what's happening with supply chain and shortage of products?
Yeah, thank you, Sonja. So I will. I'll speak today a little bit about the global supply chain issues that are affecting our condo communities now, and address, what are those supply chain issues, what's causing or the factors that are putting pressure on our supply chains, and then really what we want to know is what's the effects on our construction industry, the impacts on our specific condos, and what we can do. And so I'll try to boil down our geopolitical and social economic supply chain issues in 2 minutes or 3 minutes. So right now, we're facing the global market's facing a severe shortage of various raw materials, whether it's steel, wood, computer chips, and then in addition to just the shortage of those, we're having issues with the logistical shortages of moving those products from the producers to manufacturers to suppliers to consumers. At the same time, we're dealing with global labor shortages that are affecting our ability to move these things, and a global energy shortage. And obviously what's causing these different shortages, COVID is the one that we've been dealing with the last 2 years, various business closures or government protocols, labor complications. All of these things are just impacting our ability to move goods around the world and for people to get the goods that they need. We're also now dealing with more climate change events than what we've seen, and causing manufacturing interruptions, like the polar storm that we had down in Texas affecting the petrochemical industry. We're dealing with the forest fires and flooding, and all of these acute climate change events are affecting, again, and just adding to our pressures on our supply chains. And then, we're having an ever increasing need for all of these supplies and services. It's not just that there's less of them and we're having a hard time moving them around. There's more of a demand in general. And so when I try to put some numbers into that and actually say, what has increased and what the effects of those supply chains are on our pricings, I reviewed the producer price indexes, which measures the relative change in costs of raw materials. So let's say plywood or steel or ready-mix concrete. And what we're seeing is across 13 of the 15 major construction industries, it's double-digit increases between year over year. When I take a look at the specific issues with the construction increases, we can look at the construction price indexes. And again, we look at the relative price from year over year for various commercial, institutional, and residential buildings. And we're seeing the same kind of steady increase until about 2020, and then we're seeing double-digit increases. And so for townhouses and single detached houses, those were up 22.5% from 2020 to 2021. So when we look at the systems themselves, and not just the raw materials, but concrete projects, roofing projects, HVAC projects, the average cost has steadily increased by double-digit numbers. So when we try to take a look at how that impacts on your individual condo or our condo communities, we can expect, and I think we should expect some cost increases, but how much and to which projects is going to differ. These indices are great at understanding what's happening globally, but we're not even just dealing with new construction. We're rehabilitation, and there's different pressures and realities when dealing with rehabilitation projects. If we take a look at a typical concrete project, a $300,000 parking garage repair, the raw materials have very little effect on that particular price. We might need to spend 10 cubic feet for a $300,000 repair. That's a couple of concrete trucks, and that's $3,000 to $4,000. So even if the concrete was to double in price, we're not going to see our project cost for double in price, which is different than, say, a sealant project where it's not nearly as labor intensive, and it is far more product intensive. Where if we're looking at concrete, you might spend 10, 15, 20 days chipping and just 1 day in pouring. In a sealant project, you'll see it's about 50-50, the removal and the replacement. So the cost increase that we're going to see coming to the condos isn't necessarily the same doom and gloom that we're seeing for the raw prices or for the new construction, but there are going to be cost increases. We saw some last year, but I think in talking with our suppliers and in talking with our contractors, we're going to start to increasingly see some of that cost being moved from the contractors and back over into the consumers. We're going to see that as when I reviewed and surveyed with the various suppliers and contractors, the projects that they were more concerned with were sealants, concrete repairs, the plywood, protection boards. All of these deal with petrochemicals and resins or curing agents, which are in short supply. And so we're seeing that that there's a lot more pressure on these type of projects. How that will relate to cost increase, it's going to be a lot very much dependent on the demand and the labor demand and what our contractors can actually physically get out. They're not looking to move all of those costs over to the consumer, but we're going to see more pressure for them to start doing so, more so than what we saw in 2020. They're having, much like all of us, issues in increased labor demand. So there's an increased demand. There's less labor out there in the Great Recession, and the labor that is available is commanding a higher price. So these things, and then coupled with inflation, are going to just creep those prices up, and it's going to be very, very dependent on the type of project and the timing of that project. right now, when we take a look at what's happening geopolitically, what's happening in Russia and Ukraine is going to affect oil prices, and that's going to affect, and there's going to be a trickle. There's just so many different pressures on our supply chain right now that the contractors are dealing with a lot of uncertainty, and that's going to be passed to us. So when we take a look at outside of costs, I think what we're really going to see is impacted schedules and impacted availability. We used to, when securing bids for various works, look at a 60 to 90 day price guarantee from the contractors, and that's gonna be greatly impacted. And we're seeing as little as 15 days now, because when the suppliers, and our contractors were not necessarily having the ability to stock and create major stockpiles of the products that they're going to need, they're relying on on-time delivery of these materials. They're not able to hold prices for longer because that's all that they're given, if they're even given any price certainty from the suppliers. So, we're going to look at can the work be started and completed in the preferred time. We're going to have, an increased environment for unexpected delays. And I think we'll need to better plan for those. We've relied many times in the past on phase projects, taking a very large project, breaking it over over 2 or 3 or 4 years. There's going to be less appetite for contractors to do that because they don't have the price certainty or even just the availability of the product. So there's going to be pressures there. And then we're going to need to be more flexible with product substitutions. Right now, we're seeing a tremendous amount of weather sealing or waterproofing going from a silicone to a urethane, just because the availability is not there. We can have a talk as to which is better and the merits of each, but the industry had moved towards more silicone, and we're seeing that come back just because of the availability. And then the aesthetic choices, very limited color selection. So we're going to need to be able to be more agile, more accommodating, knowing that the contractors are dealing with tremendous amounts of uncertainty, and that uncertainty hasn't, even last year wasn't always transferred back to the condo. And I think we're going to start to see more of that uncertainty pass to the condo. So what can we do? We need to start the planning process sooner. We have to understand that getting all of the stakeholders involved, your property manager, your engineer, your contractors, and even legal, in understanding what the impacts are to our short-term projects. What is the risk of deferring a project? What is not just a cost risk, but what is the risk to the building and to the systems? Can they be deferred? If they can't, what alternate sources can we do to fund those shortfalls? Should we look at all projects scheduled in the reserve fund study for the next year to 3 years to make sure that the budgets are still accurate, because there is tremendous fluctuations happening right now that might not affect the 15 to 20 year timelines, but definitely will affect in the very short term. If we start a project and that project is delayed, how is that impacting our owners, and how is that impacting the use of various common elements or exclusive use elements? And I think we should have an understanding of what those impacts are, and even let our owners know that these are the constraints and the pressures that we're feeling, and there's no perfect time to start something. With the COVID and climate change and geopolitical climate, we're going to need to understand that delays and costs are short-term understanding, and long-term there's still lots of uncertainty. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. Our contractors and our project deliveries have been very resilient in the last few years with moderate increases. I just think the climate right now and in dealing with our contractors is that uncertainty is going to start to be passed. There's a lot of pressures with how is inflation going to affect things going forward? And I just think we need to recognize that these are real challenges and real uncertainties, and that we need to expect that the likelihood of a project being delayed or costing more than initially anticipated is there, and to really work with our engineers and property managers and contractors to make sure that we've done everything we can to identify those risks before moving ahead with the project.
Thanks, Evan. And I'm gonna put this challenge to you and to some of the other engineers and property managers who are on this call today, and even condo boards. What are your top 5 items that you're seeing in short supply right now? So let's put that into the chat. If you've got experience with certain items, and let's see if we can get a list going of what some common items are that people are seeing short supplies of now, that we're going to have to be, as Evan said, a little bit more patient about. So thanks, Evan. We're now going to move on to our next topic, and talking about the shortage of supplies and the shortage of labor. This is causing problems with existing contracts. And we've got Jon Dickson and Patricia Elia, who are going to talk about what's happening right now with contracts being canceled and what you can do about it. So Jon, do you want to start this conversation off and tell us sort of what's happening out there?
Sure. Yes. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I'm Jon Dickson, a project principal at Pretium Engineering. We are, well, as Evan spoke about, we're seeing shortages in the industry. So everywhere you look, there's a shortage. It seems it's not just construction industry. You're seeing it at the grocery stores. You're seeing it at the hardware store. You're seeing it everywhere, really. And the construction industry certainly isn't immune. A large part of this, of course, is COVID related, but then you have, on top of that, you have environmental issues. The Suez Canal certainly didn't help. This whole border closure thing is just making things worse for the construction industry. So it's been a few turbulent years for sure. And so there's 2 issues this has. I will speak about ongoing construction projects, but I just wanted to first mention upcoming projects. So those of you which work with developing reserve funds or capital plans, or those of you which are on boards and you're administering those reserve funds, you have to be aware that the prices that were put into the reserve fund was done in a pre-COVID climate. And so when it comes time, you've been putting these funds together, you've had this plan for a capital expenditure for years. Really, it comes time to, now it's time to execute. You go out for pricing and it's significantly higher than you anticipated. So as Evan talked about, do you defer this project to a future year? Well, you might if it's an aesthetic issue like a lobby retrofit or carpeting replacement in the corridors or an amenity space. But if it's something that is in a state of disrepair, balconies, balcony railings, parking garage waterproofing, windows that are actively failing, you need to all of a sudden look for alternate sources of funding, whether that be the dreaded special assessment or a loan from a private lender or from a bank, and then or you just come up with a payment plan. Some contractors now are offering payment plans in which they offer their own interest, knowing that corporations are in a tight spot. So that's an issue for upcoming projects, and you do have to be more flexible coming up and revisit those reserve funds as soon as you can to meet your expectations. But what do you do with a project that's currently ongoing? So I'll paint you a picture from my own experience. We have a multi-year project that's ongoing right now. The contract was signed in late 2019 for a 3-year window replacement project in the range of 10 million. So they signed this contract based on historical averages. So they know that glass and aluminum and gaskets and sealants go up X% per year. They put a little bit of a buffer on it to cover their risk because they're really pricing for 3 years out. But then the pandemic hit in 2020, and it started out with material shortages. But then as the shortages, there was more and more shortages, more demand. The demand couldn't meet the supply. Supply couldn't meet the demand, apologies. Prices have increased significantly from what was reasonably anticipated. So for an example, I have aluminum. The aluminum cost index, it's gone up about 125 to 150% over the last 16 months. Glass, we're looking at about 35% over the last 16 months. sealants, depending on the type of sealant that you're going for. Again, as I've mentioned, the polyurethanes are less susceptible, but silicones are in short supply and seem to be increasing monthly. I'm getting notices from manufacturers saying that we're going to increase our pricing again. We just can't meet our requirements. And then you have labor, which is also increased well above inflation. So what does a contractor do to meet ends? Most of these contracts are fixed fee. They do it for a set amount. We're going to do X amount of work for this amount of money. And so they've signed it 3 years ago, and all of a sudden they realize that I can't make ends meet. If I continue with this project, I can go insolvent. I need to find a way to recoup my fees. And so they make a claim through the contract. So a contractor can make a claim through a CCDC contract through certain means. One of those is if there's a physical change to the work. If the owner says, I want you to replace additional windows, or I want you to do this additional work, then of course the contractor can get extra for that. If there's a natural disaster, such as a hurricane or tornado that impacts the work and makes it impossible to complete the work as planned, they can request an extra for that. Or they can claim something called force majeure, which is Patricia may talk about this after, a legal aspect, but essentially it's an external event which they had no control, which renders the work impossible. Now, impossible is an interesting term. It has its own legal definition, which again, I'm not a legal professional, we won't get into, but essentially it means that the contractor can no longer complete the work in the scheduled time or cost that they agreed to from an outside external factor. Now, there's a lot of talk in the legal community about if a contractor can actually claim this on an existing CCDC2 contract. But ultimately, we're of the opinion in this specific example, the windows were still arriving on time, but the contractor has to pay significantly more for them. So it's not an impossible contract. It is a commercially impractical contract. It doesn't make financial sense for them to continue with it. They're losing money, but they're still able to complete the contract as planned. So that's not a valid claim either. So this is really an unprecedented time. The contractor has no legal means through the CCDC contract to recoup the fees that they're paying for these excess materials. So what do? If I'm a contractor and I'm going to lose $300,000 on a job that hasn't even started yet, I could walk away from a contract I already signed. But that's not as easy done as it is said. Because if you walk away from a contract and you're a reputable contractor, you have a certain reputation in the industry that you need to uphold. If you walk away and other places know about this, your opportunity for future work significantly decreases. Consultants and owners will no longer contact you because they don't feel that you'll live up to your end of the bargain. If it is a bonded project, which a large project should be, your ability to bond future projects could be decreased, which means your ability to bid on future work, especially public sector work, would decrease significantly. And your relationship with the consultant decreases as well. So if you have ongoing work with that consultant, or if they invite you to tenders, 5, 10 tenders a year, you're going to impact that relationship for this short-term kind of gain. So there's a lot for a contractor to lose to walk away. On the owner's side, as the corporation, knowing that contractually you're not obligated to give them the full amount of their claim, you also have to remember what could happen to the corporation and this project if you kind of force the contractor to work through financial duress. Naturally, the quality will be reduced. They'll try to speed things up. They'll try to shave time, skip steps, etc., to get the work done as quickly as possible so that they save on labor costs. The material costs are still there, but if they can install it faster, they'll save money in labor. There will be an increased likelihood of change orders. So as the work will progress, they will find small things which differ slightly from the contract, which they will now request extras for. Whereas before, contractors with a good reputation in the industry, good working relationship with the consultant would do additional items, smaller items that come up free of charge to maintain that relationship. And you could find that the overall work environment just becomes kind of a hostile. There's less communication with the residents. There's less just respect for the work site. The project itself will not end well if the corporation sticks their heels in and says you're getting no money. Because it's very hard to justify the fact that materials have not gone up. The evidence is throughout. The evidence is throughout the industry that the material prices have gone up and they are experiencing financial hardship. That you can't ignore. So what we're finding, we're still working through it right now on this one reference project I'm talking about, is you have to reach a fair agreement, common ground when it comes to negotiating. It's a good faith arrangement. So no, you don't have to pay them under contract. There's no specific contractual terms, at least in this hypothetical example. There's no contractual agreement to pay them, but as a corporation, you have to give them something. You have to be able to work with them to come to common ground to make this project end successfully. So that's where we are. The contractor originally threatened to walk away, but they realized all the things they have to lose in the future by doing so. The corporation realized that they need to give some money into this situation because they know if they had to retender this project today, it would be significantly higher than the claim the contractor is making now. And they know for the project to end in a durable fashion that they need to put some money into this to make the financial distress less for the contractor. So ultimately, we all have to work together and try. Yeah, we all have to work together to reach a conclusion that's agreeable to all parties. And I know Patricia is going to talk about what legal recourse the different parties may have. But ultimately, the more we can stay out of the courts, out of the calling the bonds, the better off the situation will be for all parties.
Thanks, Jon. And Patricia, let's shoot it over to you now. In case things don't happen as Jon is wishing for, what are things that condo corporations should be thinking about if they're facing a potential cancellation of a contract?
Well, part of me is I'm much more of a proactive thinker. So I think that, first of all, when you are thinking ahead to projects, you can design your contracts to suit your needs. And I think legal counsel can really help with this, especially on multi-year contracts. It's great that engineering firms help put them together, but the legal firms actually help design some solutions where there can be reasonable exit strategies. And that's what we've been doing with some of our clients that are facing these. We have one client who woke up and found out that they were $17 million short, again, on windows. And we had to find a solution. And fortunately, we were able to do so with a contractor. And we decided to stay out of the courts, and we figured out a way to tranche out that window contract, but keep some flexibility. But at the same time, what you should be trying to do is also manage your supply chain. This has come up in other ways where, we've talked about data breaches, I think in our last webinar. And that is, again, about managing your supply chain. And I think that's where we need to also turn our mind to. It's knowing how much money you have and getting commitments on deliverables. And we're seeing that more and more contractors are able to make those commitments if you pay more money up front. I have clients that are building commercially right now spaces, and that's what they're finding is they have to actually not give 10% or 5%, they're giving 50% to keep that commitment. So it's also being able to manage that cash flow and know whether or not it's worthwhile to make that commitment. As Jon has talked about, and Jon should also be a lawyer like me because he's thinking about all the legal issues. Force majeure is a clause that you design. You can put in if inflationary pieces are going to be a cause for force majeure delay, termination. But the question is also thinking about what happens when you terminate. So the contractor decides it's cheaper to walk away. Well, who's filling their gap? It's like Jon said, we've been working with people to actually try and renegotiate better solutions. Because it's not always that you've lost faith in the contractor. It's that the conditions of the market have changed and therefore the profit margin has changed. Everybody that gets into the contract is thinking about their profit and the delivery of the services. So a valuable exchange. So the contractors, when they see their labor costs going up, material costs going up, and their profit non-existent, you can appreciate where they are in this equation. So what we need to do is think about what are the scenarios we need to put in place if you are going to walk away. But it's not so straightforward to plan it and say, well, there'll be a contractor that can pick this up. They'll pick it up at a greater price. But then the question is, are you going to sue them? And if you are going to sue them, do you have a good clause in there to avoid court and just go straight to arbitration? Because what you should be able to do is prove what your damages are. So what you can do is create a formulaic way to look at what the parties will agree are the loss to the corp. Because the corp has lost. They have made a commitment to do a project at a certain amount. And as Jon has taken us through, there's a basis for that. We've asked unit owners to contribute to a reserve fund as per the law. So what happens if unit owners now have undercontributed? It falls on the shoulders of the current unit owners, but you've lost the opportunity of all the other unit owners ahead of you to have paid for those costs because you didn't budget enough. That's just the dynamic that we can't control. But there are losses to the condo as well. So the condo does have a good position legally. But I think as well, you need to be able to go to arbitration, avoid court because it wastes time, and just come up with a clear formula if somebody wants to walk away. But know that even if they're going to walk away, somebody is suffering damages, and plan for that. Sonja, back over to you.
Thanks, Patricia and Jon. It's definitely, we see it happening even just outside of condos, just contractors walking away. It is a reality, and it's about being proactive and trying to get people back to the table to get these projects done where both sides can benefit if at all possible. All right, so let's move on to a specific type of contract. We've got Jeff Struewing with us, and he's going to talk specifically about snow removal contracts, and today's an appropriate day for that. And I know we're coming, hopefully to the end of snow removal season, but it's probably going to be something to think about for next year. But we are definitely coming into the season where we're going to be looking at lawn maintenance contracts. So Jeff, what are you seeing right now in terms of snow removal and lawn maintenance? What are some of the challenges that you're facing?
Thanks, Sonja. Grounds maintenance contracts, particularly those performing snow removal, have had many challenges over the past few years, and in the last couple of years, it's become even more challenging. We have a little over 60 properties we manage, each with a grounds maintenance contract, usually a 4 seasons contract that also includes the snow removal. And I would say in the last 6 to 8 months, we've seen about 12.5 contracts canceled by the contractor, terminated either because they've started losing money on the contract, or they've decided that they don't want to look after condominiums any longer, or have decided they don't want to look after snow removal any longer and have shut down their business. There's been a number of things that have been really impacting grounds maintenance contractors. Snow removal is one of the biggest liabilities for them, snow and ice management. So they've seen significant increases in insurance over the past 4 or 5 years. I've heard from some contractors that their insurance premiums have more than doubled over the course of 5 years. Some contractors have been advised by their insurer to actually eliminate certain contracts that they have, otherwise their insurance will be canceled. But they've also seen fuel costs increase. Every time they're attending the property to plow snow or run that walk behind snowblower around or cut the grass, they're consuming gasoline or diesel fuel. Fuel costs have increased very significantly in the last 2-3 years. We've seen a number of contractors add fuel surcharges to their monthly invoicing where their contracts permit it. The other thing that's been facing the area, and certain areas of Huronia are more impacted than others in this regard, is labor shortage. The southern part of Georgian Bay, particularly Collingwood, Blue Mountain, has a severe labor shortage. It's been ongoing for 7 or 8 years now, and has only become worse as the pandemic began. We're hearing snow shovelers being paid $25 to $30 an hour labor cost to the employee to go out at 3-4 in the morning and shovel snow. 4 years ago, the average snow shoveler was making anywhere between $13 and $15 an hour. So that is a massive increase in labor cost. The other thing that they're facing, and this has really begun in the last year and a half, is just like material shortages, they're facing equipment shortages. Heavy duty trucks, even medium duty trucks, are very hard to come by, just like passenger vehicles now with the chip shortages and so on. So, what normally would take a few weeks to obtain a new heavy duty pickup truck or utility truck, orders now are being filled 12, 14 months out, apparently. The tractors and blowers are even worse. You drive past any John Deere Kubota dealership and you don't see anything there other than perhaps a combine or something. It's driving costs up. The trucks, the salting equipment, the plows that go on the front have all increased in price. Tractors have increased in price. So what that's causing is the contractor to, going from making a modest profit to operating at a loss. And typically the only way out is to cancel the contract. Many corporations, if they're happy with their grounds maintenance contractor, typically enter a 3 or 5 year contract to secure them for a lengthy period. And we've seen some of the contractors come along with a contract amendment, and if the board is amenable to it and renegotiating the rate to cover the rising costs, or at least allow for a fuel surcharge in some cases, prices can be averted. But in other cases, the contractors simply decide they're no longer going to service condominiums or provide service at all and just close up. And that's left a lot of our clients scrambling at the last minute. We had a contractor that was looking after 9 properties terminate all 9 contracts in October. The contracts for snow removal and grounds maintenance often begin November 1st or November 15th. So it left them scrambling. And when you start losing contractors like that, it reduces competition as well. So it, in the case of those 9 clients, they all ended up having to find new contractors and saw 30 to 60% increase in their grounds maintenance contracts, which typically is not budgeted for. Our advice to all of our clients at budget over the past few months and going forward is to allow for greater than inflationary increases for many of the services, but in particular grounds maintenance. It's usually one of the largest costs aside from the reserve fund contribution on most budgets. It's the biggest line item. So we've been recommending, depending on the nature of the property and the location, anywhere from a 10 to 25% increase in that budget line item, just to provide some contingency. The lack of competition is also making it hard to secure reliable contracted service. We have 2 or 3 clients now that have a main service provider, but also have a backup service provider, because they've all spread themselves a little thin, and they've had to exercise that a few times when we have large snowfalls, especially if it's prolonged, like we had this past Family Day weekend, and one contractor simply couldn't keep up to all the properties, so they had to call in their backup, and usually it's a significant hourly rate that's much higher than it would be on a full service contract. So for condominium boards, have a look at the contracts that you have in place. Some of them are fixed for multiple years with cost of living or a set percentage increase that, when the contract was written, was an average of inflationary values, and it might only be a 1.5% to 3% increase year over year, as opposed to being indexed to the inflation rate. So, and be prepared. If you see signs from the contractor or through the property manager that the contractor is struggling and has a challenge, speak with the contractor and try and find a resolution before they terminate the contract.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, so let's move away from sort of supply issues and labor issues and contracts, and get down to some nitty gritty when it comes to money in condos, and that's how do we collect money in condos? How do we get all this money to pay for all these expenses that we have? So we have with us Ryan Griffiths and Ashley Winberg, who are going to talk about various ways that condos can collect money. They're going to give us a very brief overview today, because our next webinar in March is going to go much more in depth into this topic. So Ashley and Ryan, just very briefly, can Ashley, maybe you start off and just sort of the very basic ways of how condos collect monies, and then Ryan, you can wrap it up with from the borrowing perspective.
Sure. Actually, Ryan, do you want to go first? We prepared a presentation.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, whatever, whatever you want.
No problem at all. Well, thanks very much, Sonja. So as Sonja mentioned, we will have a webinar on March 18th, and the topic of that is eliminating the fear of special assessment, borrowing, and common expense fees. So it'll be a lot more in-depth look at what we're going to talk about. Basically, every year a condominium corporation sets out a budget for the upcoming year, and that's expected to be adequate to cover the expenses for the next 12 months. The budget is comprised of two parts. So you have your operating budget, that's to pay operating expenses like insurance and landscaping, et cetera. And then you have your reserve fund budget, that's intended to save for major capital repairs. So a condominium corporation can find itself in a deficit in either of those instances. So it can need additional funds for operating or additional funds for reserve. It's important to understand that a condominium corporation only has one source of income. The only place you can get money is from the unit owners. So if your corporation has spent more money on operating expenses than it budgeted, it could be a single event like an insurance deductible that you didn't plan for. It could be over a period of time. So it could be an accumulated deficit. So over a number of years, you've spent more than you budgeted. Your operating budget is never going to be perfect. So you have a problem if your corporation is, let's say, holding off making payments because it has a low cash balance. So if you're not making checks that you should be making and you're holding back to cover funds, or if you're not contributing the money to your reserve fund that you should be contributing, then that's a problem. You have a cash problem, and that needs to be addressed. The only thing that will fix that problem is funding or cash. And again, the only place that a condominium corporation can get money are the unit owners. Now, that's the operating sort of shortfall that you would have. If you are a condominium corporation looking at a major repair project, and we've talked a lot about the reason why a condominium corporation may not have the money to do a major repair project today. So it's either an immediate project, or let's say you need additional funding for multiple projects in the near term. So maybe it's not immediate, but in the next few years, you have a number of projects and you're going to need additional funding. There are only three ways the condominium corporation can raise funds. So the first is to raise the condominium fees to accumulate more money. So you raise your fees in your annual budgeting process, or maybe in the middle of your annual budgeting process. That's number one. Number two is to levy a special assessment. So a special assessment can be a lump sum payment. It can be several lump sum payments, or it could be additional monthly payments or quarterly payments for some defined period of time. So the key here is it's a specific injection of money and additional cash in some reasonable, generally short period of time from the unit owners that's separate from your condo fees. And Ashley will talk a bit more about the legalities around that. So that's number two. Number three is the condominium corporation can borrow money with a loan. So this means borrowing funds from a third party, typically a bank or maybe a private lender. So the repayment of that borrowing typically comes over a longer period of time. Again, from the owners. That's ultimately where the money has to come from. But a loan could be repaid over 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or 25 years, depending on what it is you're borrowing money for, typically. So those are the three ways that a condominium corporation can collect money. And I'm going to let Ashley expand on sort of the legal aspects to that and sort of the processes involved in raising money in those three different ways.
Okay, so as Ryan mentioned, the first way is increasing common expenses. So common expenses are the expenses related to performing the corporation's objects and duties. And all owners have a statutory obligation to pay their common expenses in accordance with the proportions allocated to their unit in the corporation's declaration. Owners can't avoid paying common expenses. Even if they pools close, they can't. Owners have a statutory obligation to pay. The second way a corporation can generate funds, as Ryan mentioned, is to levy a special assessment. So if a corporation does not have sufficient funds to pay for an extraordinary expenditure, something that wasn't budgeted for, the board can levy a special assessment in order to generate the funds necessary. Special assessments are lump sum payments that owners are required to pay in addition to their common expenses. So sometimes corporations, when they levy them, they say, okay, we need the entire lump sum due by a set date, or we'll allow owners to pay in a series of set payments and ensuring that all the payments are paid by a specific date. Typically, a corporation's general operating bylaw will grant the board the authority to levy a special assessment in absence of obtaining owner approval. Generally, owner approval is not required for a special assessment. And as Brian mentioned, the third alternative is to borrow. And this is a great alternative as opposed to levying a special assessment. And as Ryan mentioned, in order for a corporation to borrow money from a lending institution, the corporation needs to pass a borrowing bylaw. The corporation's general borrowing bylaw is not sufficient. The corporation has to pass a specific borrowing bylaw for the lending at issue. And this will require that it be prepared by council, approved by the majority of owners at a meeting of the corporation, and then registered on title. But it is a good alternative to a special assessment because generally owners don't like to be hit with that big demand for payment at the onset. Now I'm going to talk about what the corporation can do if owners do not pay their common expense contributions or a special assessment. So if an owner does not pay any amount due by the date due, the corporation automatically has a statutory lien against the owner's unit. So the statutory lien covers all unpaid amounts as well as interest and reasonable legal costs and expenses that have been incurred by the corporation in attempting to collect. The statutory lien is very similar to a mortgage. It's just the security securing a debt. Now, in the condominium world, the statutory lien automatically arises the date that the debt was due, a date that they didn't pay. However, in order for the corporation to enforce the statutory lien, that lien has to be perfected within 3 months of the date that the payment was due. And this requires that a corporation register a certificate of lien on title to the owner's unit and follow a legal process in order to have that done correctly. Ensuring that this certificate of lien is registered on title within the 3-month period secures the corporation's priority over potentially mortgagees in recovering the amounts owed. I think I'm done for the 5 minutes. I was going to talk about chargebacks, but essentially chargebacks are additional common expenses that corporation can charge back to owners. And there's 5 situations situated in the Act, and the corporation may also have an indemnification provision in their declaration that allows the corporation to charge back certain costs. I'll turn it back to Sonja now.
Thanks, Ashley. And I'm sure next month when we get into more depth in this topic, we're going to have a bigger discussion on chargebacks for sure. So we'll let you expand on that then. All right. So let's now talk to Jon Juffs, who's going to just kind of give us an idea of how condos are dealing with inflation. Jon?
Thank you very much, Sonja. So inflationary pressures, for all the reasons discussed earlier by all the fantastic presentations, it's a reality, and it used to be very predictable at sort of 1 to 3% range headline inflation. And then a strange thing started to happen in like about 2018 to 19, where we actually saw periods of relatively low inflation. Now, all that went asunder when the pandemic hit and there was a recession, and all of the money got poured into the economy to help businesses stay afloat. And we're jumping out of that deep hole now at 5 and possibly 6% inflation on a monthly basis. That's going to, dampen eventually. Eventually, the financial markets will settle, and eventually the Bank of Canada policies will have their intended impact, and we'll get back closer to the 1 to 3% range. So what does a condo to do? Well, a condo makes all sorts of plans, and one of the biggest plans, the most expensive one in most condos, is the reserve fund. Got to make sure that the planned spending from reserve is being escalated at a rate greater than the consumer price index, because doing work in occupied buildings has no relationship to the cost of broccoli or the cost of footwear. So, the basket of goods that can sets the rate for CPI is heavily influenced by some things that are involved in the cost of doing work in buildings. But as the speakers before me have made clear, it's primarily labor and materials. And those two things have been changing at a rate far greater, if you can even get them, than the CPI. And so the spread over the years, over the last 25 years, has been very close to about a 2.5% spread. For the next 3 years, we're anticipating that to be much closer to a 4% spread. So if headline inflation is 3%, you can expect the costs of doing major repair and replacements over the next 3 years to be much closer to 7% change. And so we've made that adjustment in our reserve fund planning, and all reserve fund planners, I think, are doing this. So it's very important, and I'll stress it again, that column of spending from reserve is anticipated to change at a rate far greater than headline inflation, and possibly as much as 4% greater for the short term. So that's kind of how the biggest way that condos can deal with inflation. Then on the other side of the ledger, the operations side, as in particular Jeff Struewing noted, prepare budgets that have a cushion in them and that are realistic. Don't negotiate the cheapest possible price for grounds maintenance and expect that to actually be the price at the end of the day, because there are going to be situations where you do have to face the fact that a contractor was quite clear and said this is based on the cost of salt not exceeding so many dollars per metric ton, and in fact the cost of salt has exceeded that, and so he comes to you cap in hand, what appears to be cap in hand. Well, be reasonable, be check that those are the facts, and be reasonable in negotiating that. But if you had budgeted that little bit of extra, then it wouldn't be such a horrifying surprise. But if you budgeted simply the unrealistic low cost, well, don't be surprised. Slap your own wrists for not thinking ahead. And there's, every line item in your budget, you can kind of do that. We had one condominium corporation budget for a underground garage repair by including the average price of all bids received as opposed to the lowest bid. They did contract with the lowest bidder, but they budgeted for the average price because they were anticipating some changes were likely to occur. Thankfully, we're about 60% through that project, and it looks like it is coming in very close to the low bid. And so they do have that line item, a bit of a surplus in that line item in the reserve. So that's a good way to approach it. But be sensible, be cautious. And I would encourage those people who want to go in more in depth, of course, attend the in-depth director's course and look to other sources of information. Two great ones that I rely on regularly. At the end of every year, Maclean's produces a, what to look for next year type thing. And they hit the nail on the head with their 23 charts to look forward to in 2022. They've actually got some great ones there on inflation. And secondly, just to toot my own horn a little bit, the Canadian Institute of Actuaries, the other CIA, published a report. And in there is a section talking about why the cost of doing work in occupied buildings, reserve work, is so much more expensive. And there's 8 great points in there to explore and understand. But it'll take far more than 5 minutes to get into that sort of stuff. I'll just give you the headings: material cost increases, material availability, labor cost increases and availability, difficulties in working in occupied buildings, technical constraints, in existing buildings, jurisprudence limitations. I mean, often local municipalities will treat an alteration or improvement as having be required to comply with new standards, and that can create an awful lot more cost from the anticipated reserve cost. Sustainability initiatives might, and soon will be, with all the climate change initiatives, an actual mandated requirement, and that'll add costs. And then, risk mitigation to the overall well-being of the building. Are we doing this work for good and valid reasons? With that, I think we should turn it over to Patricia to talk about dissolving condos, and I get to have a few words on that as well.
Yeah, John, and there's, just before we do that, in the chat box, people are looking for links to those resources that you mentioned.
I'll post them now.
So if you could put those in the chat, I think people would be appreciating it. So yeah, we're going to move this over to dissolving condos. And, it's something that we're seeing happening more often. We talked about this at the national level, at the national conference in the fall. But Patricia, do you want to start us off and sort of just give us an idea as to sort of what's happening and why are a lot of condos looking to dissolving at this point?
Well, because it's too expensive to run them. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, what the truth is, I think, is that our condo stock is getting old. And I think people are starting to think about that as to whether or not it's even worth replacing certain assets. Our first condos in Ontario started in 1968, I think was the first one. And I think, our firm actually acts for that condo today. And I can understand why it's something that people can think about, first of all, because the assets are coming to the end of their life. The value of land is going up. In certain circumstances, I have condos where they're looking at dissolving, but the path is to redevelop the land. And I think that's what condos need to think about. What is your path? What are you thinking you would like to do if you dissolve it? I had one condo discussion last week with a potential client, and they were talking about giving everything back to the municipality for their condo. So they wanted to become independent residential homes and then give the infrastructure back. And I said, so how much are you going to give the municipality? And they said, what do you mean give the municipality? I said, well, your infrastructure is older. You've been saving to replace it. So how much do you have saved? Because I think we need to be realistic, is why would a municipality take us back? What is the incentive for them? And these are paths that need to be explored more at the municipal level to understand what the municipality would like to see from the condo. And it was interesting because that kind of shocked the unit owners that I was talking to because they didn't actually think about that angle. And I think as well, based on site plan and what the agreement was, we see it a lot in Huronia. There's a lot of downloading to the condo, water management systems, water treatment systems, you name it. There's a lot that gets put on the shoulders of the condo. And the question is that appropriate? And should it be part of the condo? And those are other discussions. But when we dissolve it, where does that all go? So we need to think about that. There are real costs associated with it, surveyors, legal, getting the votes of owners. So you need to put money aside if you're going to explore this project, because you will need opinions and you'll need to know who's going to help you negotiate through to the other side. If it's also finding a developer, you're going to need parties to help you with that. And in some scenarios, it might be that, people take back interest in the new development. There are a lot of different options out there. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree completely, Patricia. There absolutely are a lot of options out there. I'll just share with three actually real life scenarios. We had a condo client in the Hamilton area that was, I believe it was something in the order of 40 townhouse condos. And one owner started on a buying binge and ended up owning 43 out of the 46 townhouse condos. And it turns out that he was being quite deliberate. He was renting them out. He was breaking even, making a little bit of money on the rent and so on. But he had an ulterior motive. He wanted to develop the land and put up a 10-story building with an awful lot more units in it. And so he took control. And he's going to benefit from that. He's now gotten complete control and he's going to be able to build his building. And hopefully he can not go bankrupt in the process of doing it and realize it. And he's got some pretty favorable rental deals for people who've lived there, some of them almost 30 years. So he's got some pretty favorable deals with them buying into the newly built condo when the time comes and benefiting from that appreciation. So it's a bit of a good news story. The better one, of course, is the 4-unit condo in downtown Toronto that went from a rental building to conversion to condo. And those 4-unit owners bought in downtown Toronto, the most recent purchaser of the 4 bought in at something like $600,000. And so it was a couple of years ago when they bought, obviously. They've, been running and managing their condo. They're self-managed. It's only 4 units and so on. And they've just been approached by a developer with the deal of their lives. The lowest and smallest unit of the 4 will be getting in the order of $14 million. That's the value of land in Toronto these days. So that's, a really good story. That's the lottery extraordinaire. So that the newest owner, he's made what he called stupid money on the investment. And all they're struggling with now is they've managed to save a couple $100,000. They're struggling with how to dissolve that out. And they were asking us about updating their reserve fund study. And I said, you know what? I don't think you need to worry about updating your reserve fund study at the moment. I think what you need to worry about is divvying up that little bit of savings that you have and get on with your lives and enjoy it. And by the way, are you inviting me to Cuba? So the third one, less so. They were strung along by a potential deal with a developer. They ignored doing a lot of work in the condo because they thought, oh, who cares? We're going to be selling this off. And the deal fell through. And the developer walked away and said, you guys are too demanding, too difficult. And this particular site with its various water control measures and stuff like that isn't the potential site that I thought it was going to be. And they got distracted by another project that they were having difficulties with. And so that one fell through. And those owners now are stuck with significant increases to their reserve contributions to actually do the work that they should have been doing over the last couple of years. So 2 out of 3 ain't bad, I guess, but it was, would have been nice if all 3 had been huge success stories, but they aren't always. And so if you're going to dissolve a condo, have a plan in place, work with knowledgeable professionals, get out there in the market, find out what the real value is and who's likely to be interested in that value, and make sure it's real, and don't shirk your responsibilities along the way. So we'll see what happens, but those are going to be challenging times to dissolve condos. The one I haven't seen yet, Patricia, and I think you have, because I think you told me about one where they actually amalgamated. There was several nearby or several phases of a condo, and they actually amalgamated into one to increase their
yeah, we've had some that have looked into it and they get scared by the cost of doing the upfront surveying work. But when you look at the long-term operational cost, it actually works out to be, better sense in the long run. And that, I think, in Huronia is a prevalent kind of issue because some of the condos are very small.
I'm going to jump in here, guys, because we're running out of time, and maybe amalgamation will be a topic at a future webinar, because that's a topic onto itself. But it's interesting to hear how dissolving condos is now becoming something that people are talking about, either out of necessity or because the market is so hot that it makes sense to do so, because it's not something that we talked about very much in the past, but it is a topic that's getting much more attention. So let's move on to our next topic. We're not talking about dissolving condos. We're talking about buying and selling condos. And we have with us Debbie Dale and Ashley Lamb, who are going to talk about some issues in that process. So Debbie and Ashley, do you guys want to take it off and give us your insights?
Great. Thank you very much, Sonja. Yes, we are going to discuss a little bit more about status certificates and really the buying and selling process, on the importance of hiring a real estate agent that actually understands condominiums, because everything does affect everyone else. So a unit owner and property management and board of directors and all that. So there's a hot topic here. So when someone is thinking about purchasing a condo, they should make sure that the lifestyle is actually the right fit. I think that's really what it comes down to when you're purchasing a condo. I receive a lot of calls from potential buyers that are considering a lifestyle change. And as a condo-focused real estate agent, I go through a series of questions to get a better understanding if condo living is in fact going to work for them. So I start off by asking, do you have pets? Do you have kids? Do you like the outdoors? Is having access to a barbecue important? Are amenities important to you? How many vehicles do you have? Why are you thinking about making a move into a condo? How do you feel about monthly maintenance fees? Not only am I getting a better feel for the buyer's lifestyle to see if condo living will be good for them, but I'm also narrowing down the market and pretty much matching them with the right condo complex that will suit their needs best. I can't tell you how many times I've had this discussion with a potential buyer, and by the end of the conversation, they figure out that they're actually not ready for condo living at that time. So looking at that, I just saved them a whole lot of money and time just through one phone call. Now, have you ever heard of someone purchasing a condo and months down the road, they say, what do you mean by I can't park my second vehicle in visitor parking? Or what do you mean by I'm not allowed to have 3 dogs in my suite? It's my right. If you're not educated from the beginning, purchasing into a condo could cost you a lot of money if the end result is having to sell your condo because you're unaware of the rules, bylaws, declaration, what part of the property you in fact own and have to maintain. Not only is it time consuming to find a new place and move, but you'll have to pay real estate fees, lawyer fees, land transfer taxes, and so forth. So many people do not know how condos work. I can't stress how important it is to have an agent that actually understands condominiums to help you buy and sell your condo. I've explained more the buying side, but even the sales side. The buyer agent needs to educate their buyers. So this is if you're listing. And the listing agent needs to educate potential interested buyers who call about your property and other agents that are bringing their buyer to the property, and they might not actually be educated on condo living. So that listing agent has a huge, huge role in the marketing and communication of your property. If you hire an agent that doesn't understand condos to sell yours, they might not market to the right people or could scare potential buyers off if they don't know how to communicate, educate, or answer questions accordingly. This could mean selling your condo for a lower price. Now, we're going to start talking a little bit more about status certificates. And I think, Debbie, you're going to take the floor on this one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much, Ashley. It all starts with getting the right real estate agent, I swear to God. Anyway, speaking about money matters today, I think it's useful to spend just a couple of minutes and talk about status certificates. So a status certificate, as most of you likely know, is just a representation by the condominium corporation as to the general condition of the corporation. It gives you the amount of the condo fees, total arrears, information as to how much money is in the reserve fund, and so on. There are many documents included with the status certificate when you order one, and we call this the status certificate package. So every document attached to that status certificate is mandatory to read and understand, and most rely on their real estate agent and or their lawyer to guide them through that long package. Generally, it's about 40 pages of material to read, and it's not fun, but it's certainly mandatory and necessary. And here's why. Let's assume you're looking to buy a condo and you arrive at a lovely waterfront multi-level condominium and find an easy-to-use pop-down ladder to the attic where the current owners have storage shelves and perhaps a desk or a workshop. It would be reasonable to think that if the current owner is making use of that attic, it's reasonable for you to do so if you buy the unit. Unfortunately, that's incorrect, or it may be incorrect. Let's consider your arrival to look at a townhouse villa condominium and you see a few steps under a lift-up hatch leading into a crawl space. You look down there, there's storage containers, a freezer, a water tank, and so on. It seems quite reasonable to expect that you could make the same use of that crawl space as the current owner. This may also be quite incorrect. Use of areas outside the condominium unit that are not yours to use or take over is a really big problem that I'm seeing a lot more lately in the last number of years. So in order to use, alter, add on to, or have any common element space, you need something called a Section 98 agreement. And our lawyers cover this very well in various sessions that we put on, including the 2-day director course coming up in April. So that Section 98 agreement will define what the current and future owners may or may not do with the common element space, such as how it can be used, who insures, repairs, replaces, maintains, and so on. It's all about dollars and cents, and here are some tips you might wish to consider. Tip number 1, many documents are attached to that status certificate and they're registered on title, most of them. So a title search can be done and is usually done only by your lawyer, but you can do this yourself in my experience by attending the local land registry office. Savvy buyers ask their lawyer for the entire status certificate package and they read it, every page of it. Tip number 2, for standard delivery of a status certificate package, it takes up to 10 days from the date you request it in writing and pay the required fee. While some corporations and/or managers offer expedited service for a fee, that is not necessarily possible, and the 10 days from date of request and payment really does apply legally, so plan ahead. If you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in a real estate investment, you may choose to order that status certificate yourself before you even select the condominium corporation that you're planning to join. Tip 3. The description is registered on title to every condominium unit in Ontario. The description is basically a survey or a drawing that shows in a picture form what the common elements are and what the unit is. When you buy a condominium, you are buying the unit. Look at the drawing on the description and understand what you are buying and what you are not buying. If the solid line defining the boundary of the unit on that drawing is all you are buying, don't pay for space outside the unit that you think you are going to have use of. You won't be happy if you don't get what you expect. Tip 4, the declaration, also registered on title and also included in the status certificate package, holds much information in various schedules at the back or the end of the declaration. Schedule C is the one to focus on to understand unit boundaries. So if you're buying a condominium unit and has a lovely storage loft upstairs with space accessed only from within the unit, take a look at Schedule C to see where whatever you're buying actually ends. If it's the attic over the unit is a common element and owned by the condominium corporation, Don't make the assumption that you have rights to that space. Be careful on this one because it does get misunderstood a lot. And generally, Schedule C will talk about the top layer of drywall or the drywall on the top floor of the unit. Pay careful attention to that. Tip 5, if you visit the CIO website at Condo Authority, ontario.ca, you will find a public registry. It's often useful to see who's on the board if you're looking to buy at a particular property, how long they've been on the board. Seeing a board of all new directors might be a sign of some difficulty if it's not a brand new property. Seeing outdated information more than a year old in the registry might indicate some issues that you would want to research. Check out the management firm listed there. Checking some reviews and a quick look at the website of whoever's managing the property might be an ideal use for just 10 minutes of your time. Tip number 6, select a condominium savvy realtor. Cannot stress that enough. Tip 7, before you buy and when your offer is still conditional, retain a lawyer that handles condominium sales transactions regularly. And last of all, tip number 8, check to see if the condominium that you have your eye on has a website. There's tons of information there to enlighten and educate. So grab the info you can before you spend your money. Back to you, Sonja.
All right. Thanks, Debbie and Ashley. And, you know, it's funny. It's one of the biggest purchases people make, and they don't spend a lot of time looking into making sure it's the right purchase. And at the end of the day, that costs you money, as Ashley said. So thanks for those tips. All right. So we have a little bit of time left, not a ton of time, but we're going to go to our last topic. And it's about the affordability of condos as a housing option. We see more and more condos being built, more and more people buying condos, people renting condos. And so the question becomes, in terms of money, is this actually an affordable option for people? So Patricia, you're going to start off this conversation, and then I'm going to invite the rest of our panelists if they have something that they want to add to it. Just raise your hand and let me know, and we'll get this discussion going. Go ahead, Patricia.
Well, I think what's concerning me these days is the affordability of condos. I think condos as a concept are a fabulous idea because they allow for economies of scale, and they create community. They're a wonderful idea from many different perspectives. What I am seeing that concerns me is, aside from some of the topics we've talked about today, is the downloading of costs to condominiums, which are somewhat hidden. And I think this is something that condos need to be thoughtful about. I've written about this and I know we're on a tight timeline, but I think that we should really look at whether it's fair that condos are being asked to shoulder extra burdens. For example, we now pay for the tribunal costs, and I'm okay with the tribunal that's specialized because we need to take some of the pressure off the courts. Makes a lot of sense. But when we go to tribunal, we still have to pay for advocacy, and those costs are not covered by the tribunal's rules. And I don't think that's fair for two reasons. One, I'm paying for the tribunal, and the condo, whoever is breaching the rules, if that's proven, that person should be paying the costs of bringing the condo to the tribunal. That's the way the legislation was drafted. That is why Section 134(5) is an important section in the Act, because it gives us a right that's very different than when we go to regular court. But I also think, if we are taking on the costs of waste management and water management, those infrastructure costs should result in more affordable taxes for condo owners. So I also think there's a piece of advocacy here, because sometimes I think the world looks at a condo as a corporate entity that has profit. That is not what we are. We are non-for-profit. And so therefore, we have zero balance budgets, and we're there only to cover our costs, which are escalating, as we've talked about. So I'm curious to hear from everybody else. Do you think if condos are going to be affordable in the future?
Who wants to jump in?
I'll jump in if you don't mind. I can remember a long time ago talking with property managers about, what the changes would be in their industry. And I hypothesized then in my perhaps weekend state that property management is going to become lifestyle management, because as baby boomer ages, baby boomer wants what baby boomer can get. And if they can get a simple one source, pick up the phone, say, hey, Debbie, I'm going to Florida to my other condo. Could you make all the arrangements, please? Click. And Debbie makes all the arrangements, and John goes to Florida to live in the other condo where Debbie has also made the arrangements there for him. And by the way, the car rental's sorted out and somebody's going to come in and check on that. That all comes at a cost, because Debbie presumably has a giant staff behind her, that insurance and so on, that will make sure that everything's looked after for that confluence of things to happen. So it's not about affordability, it's about desirability. And do I think condos will always be affordable in the future? No, I think they're going to become what used to be called luxurious living, the having somebody to look after your every need type living. And it won't get to that extreme, I don't suppose, but it'll be an environment where people can relax and enjoy a little bit more than single family home possibilities. But I'll throw it up to the rest of you. What do you think? I mean, is your, particularly property managers, are you becoming lifestyle managers?
I'll jump in on that. Go ahead, Ryan.
No, go ahead, Debbie, on that point. Mine's different from John's segue there.
Okay, thanks so much. I think property managers are lifestyle managers. I think we always have been. We just never really understood it before. You've nailed it, bang on the head there, John. I've been saying for years that, instead of getting our RCMs or our OLCMs or LCCIs or whatever, we need social worker degrees. So well said. But in terms of condos and affordability, what I'm seeing is what's affordable for someone when they buy a condo versus 10 or 20 years down the road when they've done that wonderful aging in place in their current condominium unit are two very different aspects. It's very difficult to consider a condominium affordable when your income stays fixed and the costs all around you go up. So I think over time, we need to sort of figure out how this is going to work for everybody, because in older sites, the residents really do struggle with keeping pace with the bills. And when you have an older site and you get a special assessment or something like that, it's really difficult. Ryan, did you have something?
Yeah, I have a couple of points that tie into what all three of you actually talked to. So number one, on Patricia's point with respect to infrastructure and fairness, you might want to talk to some of my clients that are now replacing their water main systems to the millions of dollars, to the tens of $1,000s each, that if they had lived in a single family home, the municipality would have been paying for that. So we're talking $30,000 to $60,000 each for some of these replacements that were unplanned for. To John's point, and with respect to services, don't kid yourself. You are paying someone to do all of these things for you, to cut your grass, to manage your property. You're paying for all these services that as a homeowner, you might not otherwise pay for. So sometimes people say, as their condo fees increase, oh my God, my condo fees are as high as a mortgage. Well, they may be. Recognize that you are paying someone for all these services that you might otherwise do yourself as a homeowner. So it's a trying time. And in terms of what Debbie mentioned in special assessments, do not think that just because you pay your monthly condo fees that your obligation ends there. There very likely may be other costs, whether it's an assessment or increases in fees. You have to be realistic. All the things we talked about today are going to put a lot of pressure on condominium corporations' budgets. So be aware, start getting ahead of it, start doing condition assessments, start telling your owners that fees may be and likely will be increasing. It may be cheaper to buy at the outset, but from an affordability perspective, there's other things to think about.
Thanks, Ryan. And I think we're going to have to end it there because we've gotten to the end of our webinar, but that's a great wrap up. And, I always look at condos. They're like mini cities and mini towns. We talk about condos being a fourth level of government, but we are also mini communities. And if you think about it, you divide the costs to run the city of Toronto among millions of people, and you divide the costs to run one community, a condo, among maybe 100 people. And so in terms of affordability, you're not able to divide that cost amongst as many people in municipalities. And so I think it really becomes, a challenge for condos as we get more and more stuff downloaded and costs are increasing and inflation's going up. I think it's a real big question that we probably are going to have to leave to another webinar to discuss a bit further. So thank you to all of our speakers for joining us today. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. I hope you were able to take away some nuggets or even just some things to think about. I also want to once again thank our sponsors. Without them, we're not able to put on these webinars free of charge. And so big shout out to our sponsors, Elia Associates, Common Ground Condo Law, CWB, Maxim, Atrans Council, and Purcell Property Management. And just as a heads up to all of you, our next webinar is in March, and we're going to go into more in-depth discussions about money when it comes to borrowing and collecting fees and chargebacks. And we're going to try to eliminate the fear of all those three items. So please join us on March 18th. Our webinar in May is on May 20th, and then we have a webinar on June 17th. In April, we won't be having a Lunch and Learn webinar because we will be doing our intensive 2-day director's course. You can get information about the director's course on our website. We hope to see you there. We did it virtually last year. We're doing it virtually again this year, and it was a huge success. You're going to have access to a bunch of professionals who you will be able to ask questions of. It will be much more detailed than the basic CAO course. And so we hope to see you there on April 23rd and 24th. Again, this webinar has been recorded, so a recording will be available in the next 7 to 10 days. If you have any suggestions for upcoming webinars, send us an email to admin@ccihuronia.com, and be sure to check out some of our other Ontario chapter webinars that are coming up in the next month. CCI Toronto has a webinar on March 24th called The Future is Now. Get your condo EV ready. You can sign up at ccitoronto.org. CCI Golden Horseshoe has a webinar on February 28th called Love Thy Neighbor. You can go to cci-ghc.ca for more details. CCI London is having their Lawyers, Guns, and Money webinar on March 15th to follow up on our theme, cci-sw.on.ca to register. CCI Eastern Ontario on March 23rd is having their webinar, How Does My Building Work? Go to cci-easternontario.ca. And CCI Grand River chapter is having their level 300 course, Community and Compliance, on March 26th. And you can go to cci-grc.ca. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Until next time, I'm Sonja Hodis, and from the entire CCI family tours, wishing you a good weekend and hope to see you on our next webinar on March 18th. Don't forget, CCI is your condo connection.